On the show tonight, we have a man called Ken Humphreys, who has written an incredible book called Jesus Never Existed. So, if I can welcome Ken. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure.
Well, I have absolutely no questions prepared for this whatsoever, because I don't think we really need to.
Jesus needs no introduction.
Jesus, everybody knows who Jesus is supposed to be. He's supposed to have been this guy who lived and died 2,000 years ago, and the Western world has based just about everything on that ever since. It's philosophy and everything. So, why did he never exist then? There's millions of people, billions of people believe that he did.
Yes, but of course you know that argument wouldn't stand much credence, really. The fact that the idea is popular doesn't make it true. No. I mean, there have been so many false ideas that have been held by millions of people. That is not an avenue one needs to pursue very far. The issue was really what do we know about the man who might be behind the myth? I mean, that's where most people perhaps can feel some sense of attachment to the idea. I don't think too many people endorse anymore the whole 9 yards of the biblical story.
No. Most of us would sit here and say, well, of course he didn't walk on water, of course he didn't feed 5,000 people, these are things that are maybe symbolic, etc.
Absolutely.
But...
yeah, what people do is rationalise.
Surely they hooked these myths on a real person.
Well, and that is a very plausible point of view. Very plausible point of view. It's one I held myself, I have to confess. One I held myself, and it's a sort of default position if you actually know nothing about the subject. Nothing about the subject, but rationality suggests, well, no smoke without fire. The story must have begun somewhere. It probably began with somebody called Jesus. Now, I didn't set out to sort of, if you like, demolish that idea. I set out to write a rather different book originally, one about the origins of the Dark Ages. But that made it necessary for me to look at the origins of the church, because the church and the Dark Ages go very closely together. And the obvious starting point, it was quite honestly say, well, what do we know about Jesus as a historical character? That was my starting point. Now, that is when you suddenly stand at the doorway of a void, because you might imagine you could very readily find the historically validated biography of Jesus.
It's called the Bible.
Well, yes. Unfortunately, once you start discounting the miraculous elements, you have to then wonder, what on earth do you have left? And my investigation has led me to the inescapable conclusion that what you have left is nothing. It is not an apple with a core, but an onion, which when you peel all the layers off, you have no centre. Now, for most people, and I will accept this, for most people, that is an idea they find it difficult to take on board. You know, they like to think, well, there was something at the beginning. You know, it began, it obviously developed, maybe they added the odd myth to the story along the way, but there must have been something at the core. But the challenge really is to find that core. And I should say, I'm not the first person to go down this path and say, hey, you know, the emperor has no clothes. You know, there is nothing there. You know, for 200 years, scholars have been saying that. Scholars have been saying that you cannot find the historical Jesus. Some, who have been theologians themselves, have sort of just held up their hands and says, well, stop this inquiry. It's of no relevance. We're concerned about the Jesus of faith. So they dismiss the inquiry, and, you know, for them that's okay. Well, I think for any, you know, serious scholar who's interested in finding the truth about this, you don't accept the Jesus of faith as a fig leaf over this uncertainty. And so many scholars have actually gone on record and argued from various points of view there is no historical core. And then, of course, their investigations, as do mine, leads on to exploring, well, how did we get this glorious myth then? So that's the bigger issue. Yes, there is something of a mystery there. You know, why does he say certain things? Why does he do certain things? And the exciting thing about that is we are now discovering where these things come from. You know, and if we can find the precedents and the antecedents for all that Jesus said and all that Jesus supposedly did, then really you cannot any longer hide behind the fig leaf of, you know, the Jesus of faith.
Well, good answer. I mean, after the break, what we're going to do is we'll go a little bit deeper into this. I mean, for instance, I'm interested in a lot of people are chasing bloodlines.
Right.
You know, this is something of interest. This is extra biblical stuff, and that's going to be a fascinating thing. So join us after the break when we find out why Jesus never existed and what it means. Hello and welcome back to Gardiner's World, where we're joined by Ken Humphreys, the writer of Jesus Never Existed. I don't think you can get much more controversial than stating something like that, let alone proving it. You must have had a lot of grief since you launched this book.
Nothing I can't handle.
No, you've not had any calls for book burnings or...
I've had books attacked, yes. I've had the odd death threat, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yes, but I mean, I like to think their bark is worse than their bite.
Well, normally, if people threaten to kill you, they tend not to. So.
Yeah, that's right. But, you know, if you hear of my assassination anytime soon... But,
Does it not concern you that you are upsetting, you know, over 1 billion people on the planet who have faith and belief in Christ?
Does it concern you that I'm upsetting them? Well, that is not the way that humanity might advance. At the end of the day, nobody has to read my book, you know, and I'm sure that 1 billion people will not, for the most part. Is it wrong to disabuse them of their ideas? Well, I'd say in a robust debate, if their ideas hold water, they should be able to defend them and tell me where I'm wrong, you know. And after all, I may not be the only writer, but let's say I'm part of a tiny minority who hold this position, and there's a vast industry of religious propaganda reinforcing it all the time.
Is this a belief for you, though?
Is it a belief? Well, as I say, 15 years ago, I would have gone along with the comment of most people. There was probably some sort of Jesus character. It's only the fact that the evidence was never there, and in fact, one began to see how the story was assembled, that it became then necessary, I think, to point this out.
Yeah.
Now, if I'd missed something, I'm sure the good and the great that speak for Jesus Christ would have corrected me in no short order. Now, I've had probably 2 million visitors to my website. Many of them have been Christians. A great many of them have written to me, and I think only one has ever attempted to correct anything of an historical nature. You know, thousands of them have told me they're either cursing me or praying for me, but, you know, they do not come back and say, but you've missed this bit of evidence. You know, they do not have that. They circle the wagons behind their gospel. So,
I mean, today, one of the big things in this world today, you know, in the esoteric world, is the bloodline elements. You know, before you came on, we had Dan Green on, which is talking all about the Rennes Chateau and the Lincoln Da Vinci Code stuff, which is about the bloodline of Jesus, which is about the fact that Mary Magdalene had a child by Jesus, and that has become the royal bloodlines of Europe, etc. There's many people working on this: Tim Wallace-Murphy, Hugh Montgomery, you know, etc. The Holy Blood, Holy Grail was all about this kind of thing. So, you know, the fact that these people are tracing back through texts in time, what would you say to that?
What a wonderful hobby. What a wonderful hobby, yeah. Tracing bloodlines back to Jesus. Now, you know, really, that if you reflect on what you are saying there, I think if you had lived in the 2nd century, you would have had difficulty tracing a bloodline back to Jesus. Let alone, you know, another 1,800 years. This idea is patent nonsense as far as I'm concerned, but I respect other people if they want to pursue that line.
Well, there are certain texts that they point out, you know, I mean, I can't remember the exact names of them, but there are certain Gnostic texts that they point out where it states quite categorically that Jesus had sexual relations with Mary Magdalene?
There are texts, Gnostic and otherwise, that say all kinds of weird and wacky things.
Right.
Yeah. Now, if you want to particularly centre on one about Jesus being married and having a family, you can find it. You can find stories of Jesus' childhood. I particularly like the one where he sort of, some young boy makes him angry when he's a child and he kills him. And Mary tells him off and he brings him back to life again. I mean, you know, there are lots of stories. What do we make of a story?
I think the problem for me with a lot of that stuff is that you can actually find, like you say, antecedents. You can find things from before that mirror it. You know, you can go to Egypt and you can find the same story. You can go to Mesopotamia.
That is such a crucial point. It is not merely a question of pointing to the shortcomings of the gospel story of Jesus, such as it is, and saying it's contradictory, it's incomplete, it's unconvincing. It's the fact that nearly everything, if not everything, that Jesus has purportedly done is to be found in earlier religious stories, and everything he has supposedly said has been said by somebody else, and that also can be found elsewhere. You know, there is not a trace of a real man there at all.
No. But what there is still very profound and important, isn't it? Because they do portray certain truths.
Indeed, it may, if we begin to interpret Jesus not as a historical creature, which is really what the Roman Catholic Church decided sometime late in the 2nd century, but was really an allegorical tale in order to hang words of wisdom on a figure. Now, that is more than likely the case, and that if it was part of folk wisdom, received